A big item in the FY23 budget to be presented tomorrow will be the food and fertilizer subsidies. In the current financial year, the revised estimates for both these items is expected to go much above their budget estimates. The first is the additional free food grain that the centre is distributing under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana as COVID relief. And the second is the additional fertilizer subsidy burden on account of a spike in international rates. Available figures show that the revised estimates for food subsidy in FY 2022 is expected to be around 3.9 trillion rupees against the budget estimate of 2.43 trillion rupees. In case of fertilizers, the revised estimate could be around 1.4 trillion rupees, which is almost 73.5% more than budgeted.
Food subsidies may not decline because the pandemic-related relief may continue, and also off-budget subsidies bringing into the budget also may continue. Similarly, fertilizer subsidies may not decline because the international prices are still higher, and petroleum subsidies also may not decline because petroleum products prices increased, although there is some decline in last 1 or 2 months. Reforms may not be undertaken, particularly in agriculture and the food fertilizer, because of the elections in state assemblies soon, and also 2024 general election.
As Dr. Mahindra Dev pointed out, bringing any substantial reforms to ensure a meaningful reduction in the centre's subsidy expenditure is unlikely. Unlike petroleum reforms, it is very difficult in food and fertilizer because of the huge political implications that the move might have. In food, reforms can be administered in the following ways: either by lowering the number of beneficiaries covered under the National Food Security Act, or by increasing the rates at which grains are sold through ration shops, or by cutting down an open-ended procurement system so that the pressure on purchases is reduced. No government can take any of these steps with general elections just a few years away. Similarly, in case of fertilizers, any move to align retail prices to market rates could antagonize farmers.
Subsidies, they have, opportunity cost. So instead of giving subsidies, if they are being allocated for investment, especially agri-infrastructure, I think these will give more returns than what they are giving right now. If you look to the fertilizer subsidy, the beneficiaries are largely in the favorable environment, especially irrigated environment. And mostly it is going to rice, wheat and sugarcane. And mostly the large farmers are benefited as a result of this fertilizer subsidy. Rain-fed areas, marginal farmers, small farmers living in marginal areas, hilly areas, backward areas are not benefited much from the fertilizer subsidy, as they are using too little of the fertilizer.
In Budget 2021, the centre had announced its plan to privatize 2 state-owned banks, but it made little progress to implement the plan on the ground. That was because it could not move legislative amendments to enable privatization of public sector lenders, the first step towards privatization, due to COVID-19 pandemic and disruptions in Parliament. According to the proposed amendments that were to be moved in the winter session of the Parliament, the government is to lower the minimum stake it holds in public sector banks to 26% from the previously mandated 51%. The legislation also aimed at empowering the government to make a scheme for privatization of PSBs in consultation with the RBI. The proposed legislation had provisions regarding the disqualification of directors, as well as terms and conditions for service of chairman, whole-time directors, and board of directors.
These banks have been constantly needing government infusion directed from taxpayers' money to support operations. There is an argument that a private control of these banks would stimulate a wholesome, efficient banking system, which would be better prepared to support banking needs of high aspirational economy, limiting demands on government resources. On the legal front, PSUs are governed by Banking Companies Act. which mandates minimum 51% shareholding for government and caps the voting right at 10% for a non-government shareholder, which would require amendments and need to be passed by the parliament. I think that's the first step. To start with, I think government has infused significant amount of capital, strengthening the balance sheet of some of the weak PSUs. This is likely to make private investment more attractive for some of these banks. However, the bigger question is who could be the potential suitor? One could believe that some large domestic private banks or some foreign banks could be one. However, private banks have generally been lukewarm to the idea of acquiring PSBs, owing to challenge in system integration, HR culture, and policies. Nevertheless, the attraction of ready-made infrastructure and a sizable low-cost deposit base would act as temptation. Government will need to provide full operating flexibility to the acquirer to further improve the appetite.
The government is also to consider changing the foreign direct investment limit in the public sector banks, which is 20% at present. The government has informed Parliament that the Cabinet has not taken any decision on privatisation of two state-owned lenders announced in Budget 2021-22. However, the Niti Aayog has reportedly recommended privatisation of Indian Overseas Bank and Central Bank of India. Central Bank of India is likely to be removed from the RBI's prompt corrective action framework soon. The centre is also likely to infuse capital in Central Bank of India and Indian Overseas Bank, which got out of RBI's PCA last September to meet regulatory requirements. Despite the pandemic, public sector banks have reported profits in the ongoing financial year. Impressive raising of capital from the market by PSBs has made the government confident that such lenders are now self-sufficient and may not have to look to the centre for capital in future. PSBs recorded net profit of 31,820 crore rupees in FY21, which has been the highest in the last 5 financial years. With regard to privatising one public sector insurer, the Niti Aayog has suggested privatisation of United India Insurance, the approval to which is yet to be accorded by the Cabinet. Once approved, the DIPAM would start the privatisation process of the insurer. Besides this, the government is also looking to restructure the regional rural banking space. A panel was appointed by the centre to suggest turning around of RRBs, which is learned to have suggested segregating RRBs into categories based on the capital they require and if infusing funds in them is feasible. The committee's recommendations are with the government, and the Finance Minister may look at providing a roadmap to turn around regional lenders in tomorrow's budget.
So despite the consolidation which has happened among various regional rural banks, the challenges in terms of their weak operational profile continues, which in turn is because of their weak credit deposit ratio. And weak credit deposit ratio in turn is driven by their capital position, which has remained impacted because of the recent changes in the pension liabilities impacting their provisioning and their profitability. The ability of these banks to raise capital, push for the credit growth, improve credit deposit ratio will be very crucial for these banks to turn around their profitability and their performance. To that extent, the shareholding structure of these banks plays an important role, whereby 3 shareholders, the sponsor bank, the central government and state government, multiplicity of these shareholders constrain the ability of these banks to raise capital in a timely manner. We have seen that even if, let's say, one shareholder, like a sponsor bank, is willing to put capital, the ability of putting that capital depends on the other shareholders putting that their share of capital in a timely manner. So there have been changes in terms of the revamp of the shareholding structure of these banks, whereby government has proposed a holding company structure, which in turn can enable these banks to raise capital in a timely manner. However, the mechanics, the way the sponsor banks, the state government will transfer their shareholding to the holding company, that needs to be determined to basically maybe finalize or implement this holding company structure.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.